This is Ben Doughty for The Hardest Game with former IBF light welterweight champion Terry Marsh. Good to see you, Terry.
Nice to be here in my own home. It's a lot easier not having to travel.
Tell me about it. Well, Terry, in my little career as an interviewer, you've probably been my most elusive quarry up to now because you've never really agreed to answer questions as such previously. Why are you interested in talking now?
Well, when you say answer questions, I'm not trying to avoid questions, but I find myself in lots of ways, when you answer questions, sometimes I have a knack of, I don't have a knack, but the consequences of my answering questions finds people who've asked the questions and broadcasting them getting sued.
Yeah, we did discuss that.
So, I don't like giving money to the people who sue them, and so I try to remain silent.
The reason why you wanted to speak today, in fact, is because you recently read Frank Warren's autobiography, Frank and Fearless. Is that correct?
It seems to have initiated me. It's give me to coin a phrase, give me a kick up the arse. Yeah.
Okay, so essentially the floor is yours. I know you had an issue with some of what was written in it and you were looking for some kind of redress, whatever form that might take. Yeah,
that's the case. And going back to what I turned around and said, I don't want other people find themselves getting sued and not able to sort of fight their corner and having to settle out of court at great cost to them, one way or the other. And so I set up my own platform as such, and done a video on that platform. So it's my platform, and if I'm going to be sued, then I will defend it.
So what is the crux of the issue? I believe there is a passage in the book which essentially says, because you and Frank fell out initially over your shock retirement. There was a newspaper article in, I believe it was The Sun, saying world champ Terry has epilepsy. And I believe also that it was the day after you'd signed a contract to fight Frankie Warren from Corpus Christi, your number one contender. Is that all correct?
That's all factually correct, but it ain't put into context, which creates difficulties for me. The context is that I'd said I'd only have one more fight and then retire undefeated. I had that fight. Frank recognised the fact that that was my intentions. And then subsequently from that, Frank took a different view. Best way of describing it, I guess, is like you have a conflict of interest, particularly when it comes to boxing, between a contemporaneous promotion, whereby there's a contemporaneous promotion and it's managing a managed boxer. Contemporaneous management of the fighter, of the managed fighter, and it creates difficulties. But it's obvious to most people that conflict of interests. As far as I'm concerned, Frank failed to manage that conflict of interests to my satisfaction, and so I effectively implemented his dismissal.
Okay, so as many times as I talk to you, and I've read your autobiography as well, and I've dug out everything I can find, I can never quite fully understand, why did you sign the contract that day? Was it at Ernie Fossey's house, or was it at Frank's house?
Yeah, no, it was at Ernie Fossey's house. And what happened was, I had this conversation with Frank, whereby having been diagnosed with suffering from epilepsy. Frank will deny this. Well, he has denied it in a court under oath. Equally, I've said it in a court under oath. And the consequences of that was that I wanted to be able to take some advantage of having this diagnosis, in the sense that I realised there was a press office coming up for a particular fight with Frankie Warren, but maybe it'd have some advantage to the other contender, who was Buddy McGirt, whereby I could be paid to step down because they don't know the circumstances at that particular moment in time. That was dismissed by Frank as not being possible. And so we go our separate ways from there. And then there was talk about a fight with Camacho. And that turned out to be sort of a false dawn. And I had false hope as a result, thinking that I can still hang out with a fight with Camacho. But that was never going to really happen. And so the reality of the situation is, the terms and conditions that I laid down at the very beginning was that I'd have one defence if I win the title and then retire undefeated. And so that was unless I was paid £500,000 or $500,000. And the only way $500,000 would be realisable would be a fight with Camacho. So I was hanging out for that, against all hope, with the benefit of hindsight. So that's where we were. It then turned out that Camacho was never going to happen, and we had the possibility of the purse offers for Frankie Warren. But the purse offers became apparent when I had this visit with Frank to Ernie Foss's house on the Sunday, which is on the eve of the deadline of the purse offers. And it was a Sunday because it originally was going to be a Saturday, but I put it back because I thought Frank might have had wind of the Sun's exclusive coming out the following day on the Monday. And so I went there with the intentions of putting him in the picture with regards to the exclusive that I'd done with the Sun. He had the opportunity to do this, of course, when I told him that I had the epilepsy diagnosis, but he denies being told about that. And so I took it upon myself. I was also, at that particular time, ready to tell him about the story forthcoming. And so when he did turn up, he turned up with his briefcase and of some description, and then the boxer manager contract. And I see written on it Frankie Warren. Date was to be agreed or to be arranged. It was TBA. So I don't know whether it's to be arranged or to be agreed. But the thing is, and then there was the purse of $250,000, if I remember rightly. Now, I'd been going on about, I ain't going to fight, notwithstanding I told him about the epilepsy, but even put the epilepsy to one side and just assumed that he never knew about that, he's still presenting me with something which is way under what I was asking for in order for me to continue to fight. And it became apparent to me that he was not capable of managing that conflict of interests where you have a fighter contemporaneously being promoted and at the same time managed.
Yeah.
And I felt disappointed about that, and I was really angry about the fact that despite what I've told him, and putting the epilepsy to one side, despite what I'd told him, that I was going to have one fight and one fight only for $500,000 and I'm not having it, and he's just ignored me and everything else. And he's done a deal. He wants me to sign a contract for $250,000, which was effectively, had I got my full pay for my last fight, was less than I'd got for my last fight. And that, you know, are you not listening to me, Frank? This is the fact of the matter. You're not listening to me because I've got one plan, but he's got another. But he's got a promotional plan. But I didn't sign a promotional agreement with him. I signed a managerial agreement to look after my best interests. And that conflict of interest, he failed and fell at that fence. And so as far as I was concerned, I ain't going to tell him about the story. And therefore, he ran off thinking he's got the contract, he's got a deal. Apparently, he'd done a deal with the Duva brothers, which I found out subsequently. So he's doing deals behind my back in one instance. Also, he informs me, I don't know where it's true, so I never see any contracts. I've actually never seen any contracts in that respect. But on this particular occasion, he's saying he's done a deal with the Duva brothers. So if he was going to promote the fight, he would have been doing a deal with Frankie Warren, the boxer. If he ain't doing a deal with Frankie Warren, the boxer, and he's doing a deal with the Duva brothers, then the Duva brothers Frankie Warren should have, the boxer should have an issue with the Duma brothers. But he's doing deals behind my back. And that was enough for me. So I thought, you're going to get a surprise in the morning.
I understand it. So you went open-minded and perhaps willing to tell him, cards on the table, listen, there's going to be a story. And then you thought, no, it is what it is, and he's going to find out. So did you have any communication with him on the day that the story came out?
There was a communication, I think, 1 or 2 days later. He says I phoned him, but in fact, it was John Botterish, his mate, who phoned me. Frank didn't. I'm assuming he got the telephone number from Kelvin McKenzie, the Sun.
And for context, John Botterish was the man who was with him the night Frank got shot. He arrived at the show with Frank.
I'm given to understand that's the case, yeah, because he was at the Old Bailey. That's right, yeah. And John Botterish said about arrange a meet, so we arranged a subsequent meet.
Okay, and then. So did you talk to Frank directly after that? You did speak to him?
Well, no, not on the phone. Then we had a meet, which had been arranged. I can't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure it would have been arranged. It was arranged by other persons, not Frank. And then we'd met in some hotel near Bloomsbury Square.
And so we fast forward several decades, and your issue with the Warren autobiography is quite simply that he says that I think, like I say, the phrase he used, he lied through his teeth, saying that I knew about that diagnosis. He said, I have never knowingly put an injured fighter into a bout. That is the crux. You don't really have an issue with anything else he wrote.
Yeah, well, that's right. So, to be perfectly honest with you, what he turns around and says, he doesn't believe that I had epilepsy. He also turned around and said he didn't. He ain't said, I'm putting words in his mouth now, but I don't mean to do that. But the bottom line of it is, he's denying I had epilepsy. Sorry, he's denying I told him I had epilepsy, but he's effectively saying, and these are my words, not his, I don't believe he had epilepsy, but even if he did tell me, I wouldn't have believed him. Because he was of the opinion that by me having these regular brain scans and things, that epilepsy would show up on the scans. Yeah. And since they haven't recorded or flagged previously, then by definition, I can't have epilepsy. So in his defence, he didn't believe I had epilepsy, and he's got me to sign a contract, and that's where it goes. But for me, it wasn't about the issue of whether he got me to sign a contract because I never had epilepsy or I did have epilepsy. He got me to sign, or wanted me to sign a contract against my will, because he'd even recognised, and everybody else knew, the world and his brother, when I say the world and his brother, the boxing world and his brother, $500,000 or I don't fight. Yep. I was quite happy to retire undefeated.
Is it the case that you were later re-diagnosed and you don't believe today that you had epilepsy? You believe you were misdiagnosed?
Well, when you say believe and everything else, I don't know. I just follow the doctors, because it's quite ironic how this epilepsy thing came around in the first instance, because I was due to take an HGV course as a fireman to drive appliances, and I left it at the very last moment. I had to get an HGV licence. So I went to my local doctor and saying I want an HGV licence, I need a medical. And he said, bit of a problem. He says, because historically you've got a history of passing out, because I did pass out on occasions, and I went to see him, and he said, you're probably overdoing it, flaking out, which were his words, flaking out. And so he said, go and see my mate who's a consultant neurologist. He'll give you all clear, then you can do your HGV course. So I went to see the neurologist, gave him the symptoms, and he diagnosed epilepsy.
Have you suffered from any symptoms or seizures in recent years?
No. On one so-called post-boxing occasion, I was in a seminar when I was doing at university, and I had a sort of funny feeling which I was beginning to recognise early onset, so to speak, and I felt the need to speak out and say, if I fall over, don't worry.
Yeah.
And I can't remember whether I actually got off the chair or sat on the floor. I can't quite remember. But the gist of it is that's the only other occasion since. Yeah.
And you reapplied for a boxing license in 1989. You were looking at staging a comeback at the time. So obviously at that point you believed it was a misdiagnosis and you were fit to fight.
Well, I'd seen doctors subsequently, and I think it's my brother who pointed out that there was a pattern with regards to one described it as dietary post-fight dietary indiscretions.
Mars bars.
Well, yeah, effectively. In fact, we just had a cup of tea, and I said like a cup of tea and a biscuit as opposed to having sugar.
Yeah.
But it used to be a cup of tea and a Mars bar as opposed to having sugar. I've recognised the irony and sort of the futility of doing that. But yeah, so that's where it was. So it was a self-induced hyperglycemia, which is I probably made the mistake of going to see a neurologist as opposed to going to see a nutritionist, and whoever you go to diagnoses it accordingly.
Were you quite somewhat crushed of not getting the license back then? Was it important to you to make a statement and come back and get in the ring if you could have done?
Well, when you say crushed not getting a license, I got a license.
In America?
Yeah, in America, Nevada. Was it? Yeah, it was Nevada. And so it was possible to have a fight then. I only wanted to have a fight so that I could retire again in regards to on my own terms. That was the reality of the situation. But yeah, I was going to do a deal with Bob Arum. The sort of the business model would have been copying Nigel Benn. But the television in this country didn't want it. So I thought, well, I'm not fighting for nothing. So I pulled the plug on it.
Do you want to talk about the actual arrest for the shooting? Because I don't believe when we spoke on the phone the other day, you didn't have any issue with it. Your only minor issue was that the chapter essentially is about you is wrapped up in the same chapter in which he describes the shooting, which the implications of which could be seen as unfair to a man who was acquitted in a court of law. Is it something you want to discuss today, or were you not looking to do so?
Well, I'm quite happy to discuss it in its entirety. You know, I've got, but I need documents at hand before me so that I can show it and sort of prove well, I don't have to prove anything if the truth was known. I mean, just to touch on it, and then sort of put it to bed. I didn't have to be there, and that's the I'm talking about at the court. Did not have to be there at all. There was no purpose for me to be there. I was there to plead guilty or not guilty at the very beginning, and then my presence wasn't required. I didn't have a prosecution. I didn't have a defence put forward or anything. The prosecution didn't have a defence that I had to contend with. Their case wasn't strong enough.
How much of a millstone around your neck has it been? Because it's followed you everywhere, and it feels to me you may have wanted to keep a low profile anyway and distance yourself from the boxing scene, but it feels to me like that has possibly played a hand in it. Whereas I find it's difficult to mention you without all the nudges and the references and the jokes even. Yeah. It's literally seems to be something you cannot outrun in terms of your legacy, and it's a wonderful legacy on various other fronts. How much of an issue has it been, and how sick of the whole thing do you become?
It's not a problem. I actually got also charged once with removal of a wheel clamp. You know, it's a badge of honour. When I ain't quite to say shooting someone's a badge of honour. Don't get me wrong, but I'm accused of shooting. I'm not accused of shooting Mother Teresa or the Pope or anything else. Yeah. So in that respect, I spend most of my time with people not going nudge, nudge, wink, wink, and everything else, giving me false praise. Yeah. And so I have to put them right about it, of course. And I end up, with lots of people, it's allegedly, and so that's a word I end up having to say to people on many occasions.
Have you resigned yourself to the fact that most people who are interested, mostly in the boxing industry, do believe that you were the culprit, and that's just what they're going to retain forever?
I don't know, because no one tells me. Yeah. So well, now you've told me. I find it funny in many respects, because talking about all this documentation that I can refer to. So I've probably, because I ain't got the documentation in front of me and everything else, it makes it a little bit more difficult to actually show how futile the whole prosecution was in the first instance.
And I agree with you. There's no negativity towards you. Is it based on that presumption? And yes, I have encountered it. And I must admit that the whole saga does fascinate me perhaps more than it even should do. And in my experience, there is that presupposition which seems unshakable, but it doesn't manifest itself in the form of dislike or negativity towards you. If anything, there's something roguely heroic about it, like you just said to me. You're saying what you're saying is that I believe you. I mean, when people ask me about it, I say Terry is very articulate and very thorough on the matter. Since we first made acquaintance of one another at Errol Christie's funeral, you gave me a very long kind of address on that and other things. Yeah. And I say I believe what Terry told me, and I'm saying that to you now. Look in your eye, I believe you.
Yeah. Well, how can I say? Well, I've been going around for a long time on whether people believe it. I don't really matter. It's an interesting thing, because my biggest what's the way of describing it? I've got a big legal sort of issue, right? And the legal issue is I got done for assault relatively recently, fairly recently, a few years ago or whatever it was, for some job's worth, who was holding me against my will. The consequences of it was that I was tried by 2 district judges, both for different reasons. I thought were way out of line, and I was found guilty. So I've got a criminal record. I wear it as a badge of honour, in fact, in many ways, because digressing a little bit, there's 9.5 million people in our country with criminal records, which is, I think, more people than who voted for the Labour Party. But the point is, it ain't a problem. But effectively, despite the injustice of that and everything else, you can't argue. No, you've got a criminal record. I can't appeal any further because it's a magistrate's court, a summary offence as opposed to a bigger offence, which I forget, indicative, as opposed to an indictment. And but no, that's it. I can't go down that road anymore. I've done civil matters as well. I sued 2 lots of establishments. Both times they've said they weren't the right the other establishments. Now I'm out of time to do the 3rd establishment, who it definitely would have been, because by the absence of the other 2. But no, that's it. The decision's done. I can't do anything. So it doesn't really matter if I did do it or whether I didn't do it. It's done. The decision's been made. I think it's wrong that happens, but there's loads of people who are crying out with sort of decisions that should not have happened, but they've happened, and so you have to accept it. So in another roundabout sort of way, I don't really want to talk about the case where I got acquitted. I want to talk about the case where I got convicted, and we can't do that. So why should we talk about the case where I got acquitted when I want to talk about the case where I got convicted? Get that one out of the way, then we can talk about the one where I got acquitted.
Is it fair to say you have a major anti-authoritarian streak?
No. Abuse of authority, yes, but not an anti-authoritarian streak in itself. Things are done for good purpose, but if they're just done and people just abuse their authority, then I'm going to sort of stand up to it, yeah.
And you're 10 months on remand in prison, accused of the shooting. You battled against the screws in there, didn't you? And various. You were very independent and sort of unbending, from what I understand from the newspaper reports, contemporary, and also reading your autobiography. You were like, whatever it is, I'm not playing ball with you guys if I don't feel like it.
No, I decided to play by the rules. But they don't like it. But they expect you to play by the rules, but they won't play by the rules themselves. So that's where the issue became. I was playing by the rules and insisted on them playing by the rules, which created issues.
Yeah, because I remember when you, after you were acquitted, I think you were on the Terry Wogan show pretty soon after that, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And it looked at the time, when you look back I didn't see it at the time, I've looked at it recently, it looked like everything was fairly upbeat for the future at that point. Name was cleared, you know, and it's the opposite of stigma, being on a Terry Wogan show and talking, you know, charmingly. So how was the future after that? I mean, what were you looking to do at that time with your life after that, having lost 10 months of it through no fault of your own? What were you looking to do, and how did it pan out?
Well, the 10 months weren't a tragedy, as a matter of fact, because it was a good time in my life. Because at that particular time, I was busy doing everything, and in the process of doing everything, I was busy achieving nothing. And it gave me a bit of time to sort of reflect and decide what I wanted to do in life and where I wanted to go. And first thing I wanted to do when I got out, you know, to get the kids sorted out, of course, would be to education. And so I done a degree, and just was always educationally minded and reading books thereafter. So it actually put me on a good path. I ain't saying prison works. I don't recommend it to anybody, but for me, it was a laugh because of what I was doing. I tried to, but having said that, most people can't do this, but I was high profile, so I had the protection of publicity in many ways. So I could pull strokes, legitimate nonetheless, where others wouldn't have been able to get away with it. They would have got a good hiding. So I was lucky in that sense.
At times in the case, either during the prison, but during the remand period, or even before you were sent there, there's a few stories. There's that book, Lords of the Ring, where it says that you would say things like "stop hitting me" and stuff like that, or in the police interviews, as if to make it sound on the tape like you were being mistreated. Is that true? I'm sure it was in the book.
Basically, from the very beginning of getting arrested, it was not a particular. I was sent my daughter. I'd be home at a particular time, and so I was disappointed in that respect. But the so-called arrest, it was a bit dramatic, the way they done it through the customs. But the gist of it is, they put handcuffs on us and everything else. I've just come out from the country. So I ain't as if I've got any guns on me or anything else, as if they was thinking.
You just got back from America, Atlantic City, with Nigel Benn, right?
That's right, and Ambrose Mendy. Also referred to in Frank's book as the guy who hangs around in the office. But the thing about it, so I was a bit put out in that respect, and they were not sort of they treated me like a prisoner. So I reverted to type.
Did you send them down King's Cross to look in a lockup where they were supposed to find a gun when you were just totally winding them up? Is that true?
Well, no, they're the ones winding me up. You've got to understand, I'm the one who's got the handcuffs. I'm the one who's locked in the cells. And I've taken my watch off me and various other things. So if anyone's been winding up, I'm being winding up. And I turned around and said, if you're going to play like this, then I'm going to play like that as well. I was quite happy to cooperate, but they weren't to cooperate. Again, playing by the rules. So I said, if you mess me around, I'm going to mess you around. So that was the case.
So where do we go from here? You obviously are not happy about the essential allegation in relation to yourself in the recent publication, Frank and Fearless. What ultimately are you seeking to do about it, rather than just forget it and be like, well, that's not the truth, but let them think what they want to think?
Well, I had a libel case with Frank. He sued me, so I had to prove my case. It turned out that, long story short, to quote Frank's book, the jury were undecided. And so, from that point of view, the jury didn't believe me, didn't believe Frank. They couldn't decide. and they didn't have to decide because there was another issue, we call it a technicality, to be fair to Frank, whereby Frank lost the case on this technicality. So it's still unresolved. And then for him to actually turn around and say lies, lying through my teeth in the book, I thought was a step too far. And so I had plans to sue the publishers. But it's come to my attention, as I'm given to understand, that it's out of time because you only get a year. And the way the publication appears to have gone by this book puts it out of time. Now, whether that's done by design or by accident, I don't know. But I ain't able to sort of, if it is out of time, I'm not in a position to actually sue the publishers. And so, in that respect, I need to call the book out for what it is. And they say frank and fearless, but from my experience and from the bits I've read, it's more Pinocchio and pointless.
I can scarcely think of a better ending than that, unless there's anything else you'd like to say.
Oh, no. Plenty to say, but save it for another time.
Terry Marsh, always a pleasure. Thanks for talking to The Hardest Game.